Welcome to Life Story 999, where we bring you stories that touch the heart, inspire change, and surprise us with their unexpected twists. Today, we have a story titled Speeding for Love, A Family's Day in Court. Imagine a young father, trying his best in a new country, who finds himself in court over a simple speeding ticket. What follows is a journey filled with honesty, humor, and compassion, turning a seemingly routine traffic case into a meaningful experience that leaves everyone involved touched and wiser. Stay with us, and if you enjoy our stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Story 999 for more inspiring tales. Now, let's get started. The story begins one crisp morning as Emmanuel and his wife, Grace, set off with their two young sons to Providence Place Mall. It was one of those rare days where they had time to relax together as a family, and they were excited to make the most of it. Emmanuel, who had moved from Nigeria to the United States only a year ago, was still adjusting to his new life. He had received his American driver's license just 6 months earlier, and he prided himself on being a cautious driver. He was used to navigating the bustling roads of Lagos, but the rules in America were still a bit foreign to him. As they drove through the quiet streets that morning, Emmanuel stayed focused, carefully following the flow of traffic. He wasn't the type to speed, especially with his wife and children in the car. However, without realizing it, Emmanuel had drifted slightly over the speed limit. He didn't notice any speed limit signs and assumed he was driving safely at around 30 miles per hour. But as they approached Harris Avenue, the unmistakable flash of blue and red lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Emmanuel's heart sank. He glanced at Grace, who gave him a reassuring smile, though her eyes showed a hint of worry. He pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down his window as the police officer approached. "Good morning, sir," the officer said, his tone firm but not unfriendly. "Do you know why I pulled you over today?" Emmanuel shook his head, trying to stay calm. "No, officer. I thought I was driving safely." The officer nodded and explained. "The speed limit on this road is 25 miles per hour. You were driving at 35. May I see your license and registration, please?" Emmanuel's heart raced as he handed over his documents. He felt a mix of confusion and frustration. He had genuinely thought he was following the rules. The officer took a few minutes to check his information before returning with a ticket in hand. "I'm going to have to issue you a citation for speeding," he said. "You have a court date in 2 weeks. Make sure you show up." With that, the officer walked back to his patrol car, and Emmanuel sat in stunned silence. Grace reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "It'll be okay," she said softly. "It's just a misunderstanding. We'll figure it out." 2 weeks later, the day of the court hearing arrived. Emmanuel was nervous as they made their way to the courthouse. Grace, ever the optimist, kept reassuring him that everything would be fine. She believed that once they explained the situation, the judge would understand. They had both decided to bring their 2 sons along, thinking it would be a quick hearing. Little did Emmanuel know, this court appearance was about to turn into something far more than he had anticipated. As they entered the courthouse, Emmanuel felt the weight of the moment, but he also felt the warmth of his family by his side. It was going to be an unexpected day, one that would bring laughter, honesty, and perhaps even a lesson in compassion. Judge Thomas Sullivan was well known in Providence for his fair but humorous approach to justice. He believed that every case was more than just paperwork. Each person who stood before him had a story, and often, those stories held lessons that could benefit everyone involved. Today, as he sat on the bench, he looked over the docket and found Emmanuel's name. Another speeding ticket, he thought, but he had a feeling this one might be different. Emmanuel stood nervously as his name was called. He took a deep breath and walked to the front of the courtroom. Grace stayed behind with their 2 sons, baby Noah resting in her arms while Ethan clung to her side, his eyes wide as he looked around the large room. Emmanuel's palms felt clammy, and he could feel his heart pounding, but he tried to keep his composure. He knew he had to stay calm for his family. Judge Sullivan adjusted his glasses and gave Emmanuel a welcoming smile. "Good morning, sir," he greeted warmly. "I see we have a speeding ticket here. How long have you been driving in the United States?" Emmanuel cleared his throat before speaking. "Good morning, Your Honor. I've only been driving in the U.S. for about 6 months," he began. but I have many years of experience back home in Nigeria. I wasn't aware of the speed limit on Harris Avenue, so I thought it was around 30 miles per hour. The judge chuckled and leaned back slightly in his chair. So, let me get this straight, he said, raising an eyebrow. You celebrated getting your American driver's license by speeding? A few people in the courtroom chuckled, and Emmanuel gave a nervous smile. No, Your Honor, he said quickly, shaking his head. I promise, I wasn't celebrating. I honestly thought I was following the correct speed limit. He looked over at Grace, who offered him an encouraging nod from the back of the room. Judge Sullivan glanced in Grace's direction and noticed her standing there with the two children. Is that your family? He asked, his voice softening. Emmanuel nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. Yes, Your Honor. My wife, Grace, and our two sons, Ethan and Noah, were with me that day. The judge smiled and motioned for Grace to come forward. Why don't you bring the little ones up here? He said. I think this is a family affair. Grace hesitated for a moment, then made her way to the front of the courtroom, Ethan holding onto her skirt as they approached the bench. She stood beside Emmanuel, and Ethan looked up at the judge with curious eyes. Baby Noah squirmed slightly in her arms, his big eyes blinking in the bright courtroom lights. Judge Sullivan looked down at Ethan and smiled warmly. What's your name, young man? He asked. Ethan. The boy replied softly, his small voice barely audible. Well, Ethan, the judge said, leaning forward slightly, was your dad driving too fast that day? Ethan looked up at his father, then back at the judge. There was a moment of silence, and everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Finally, Ethan nodded. Yes, he said honestly. He was going a little fast. Laughter rippled through the courtroom, and even Judge Sullivan couldn't help but grin. He turned to Emmanuel, who looked embarrassed but amused. Well, there you have it, the judge said. Honesty from the mouth of babes. Emmanuel let out a small sigh, his shoulders relaxing just a bit. Your Honor, I really didn't mean to speed, he said earnestly. I had my whole family in the car, and I truly thought I was following the right limit. Judge Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. He could see the sincerity in Emmanuel's eyes and the love and support emanating from his family. He tapped his fingers lightly on the bench, considering his next words. You know, Mr. Emmanuel, I've always believed that everyone deserves a second chance, especially when there's no ill intent involved. You were not recklessly endangering anyone. You made an honest mistake. He paused, then added, but it's important to remember that speed limits are there to keep everyone safe, especially families like yours. He turned his attention back to Ethan, who was now holding onto his father's pant leg. Ethan, do you think your dad will drive more carefully from now on? Ethan nodded vigorously, a smile spreading across his face. Yes, Your Honor. I'll tell him to be careful. The judge smiled broadly. I believe you, young man, and I think your dad will listen to you. He turned back to Emmanuel. I'm going to dismiss this ticket, Mr. Emmanuel, but I want you to promise me that you'll be extra careful, especially when you have your family with you. Can you do that? Emmanuel's face lit up with relief. Yes, Your Honor. I promise. Thank you so much. Judge Sullivan gave a satisfied nod. That's what I like to hear. Case dismissed. Take care of that beautiful family of yours and drive safely. Emmanuel thanked the judge again, and Grace mouthed a silent thank you as well. As they turned to leave the courtroom, Ethan waved at the judge, who waved back with a smile. The family walked out together, the weight of the day lifting off Emmanuel's shoulders. What had started as a nerve-wracking court appearance had turned into an unexpectedly warm and memorable moment for Emmanuel and his family. A reminder of the importance of honesty, compassion, and the love that bound them together. Judge Sullivan leaned forward, a twinkle in his eye, as he looked directly at Ethan. Now, young man, he said, his voice warm and inviting. I need your help here. Was your dad driving too fast that day? Ethan glanced up at his father, then back at the judge. A moment of silence stretched across the courtroom, and everyone seemed to hold their breath. Emmanuel gave a nervous smile, unsure of what his son might say. Grace gently squeezed Ethan's shoulder, silently encouraging him to speak. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice clear and innocent. Yes, he was, Your Honor, he said, nodding slightly. The honesty of his words hung in the air for a moment before the room erupted in light laughter. Even Judge Sullivan couldn't help but smile, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Ah, honesty from the mouth of babes," Judge Sullivan said, shaking his head. He turned his gaze toward Grace, his tone playful. "And what about you, Mom? Did you tell him to slow down?" Grace smiled, a touch of humor in her voice. "Honestly, Your Honor, I didn't feel like we were speeding too much. We were just trying to keep up with traffic, and it didn't seem dangerous." The judge nodded thoughtfully, then returned his attention to Ethan. "So, young man," he said, leaning forward again, "what do you think? Is your dad guilty or not guilty?" Ethan looked at his father, then back at the judge, his face serious. Without hesitation, he replied, "Guilty." The laughter in the courtroom grew louder, and even Emmanuel couldn't help but chuckle. Judge Sullivan raised his hand for quiet, smiling warmly at the young boy before looking back at Emmanuel. "You have an honest boy there, sir," he said. "It seems you're guilty by his verdict. But don't worry, that's not the end of the story." Emmanuel nodded, feeling both embarrassed and amused. He looked at Grace, who gave him an encouraging smile. Judge Sullivan leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers thoughtfully on the bench. "You know, Mr. Emmanuel," he began, "sometimes honesty like this is exactly what we need to remind ourselves of what truly matters." He paused, his gaze moving between Emmanuel and his family. "It's clear to me that you weren't trying to be reckless. You made a mistake, and you have an honest young man here to help keep you accountable." The judge glanced at Ethan, who was now holding onto his father's pant leg, looking proud of himself. Judge Sullivan smiled at Ethan again. "Ethan, you did a good thing today. Telling the truth isn't always easy, but it's always the right thing to do. And I think your dad is lucky to have you looking out for him." Ethan beamed, and Emmanuel felt a swell of pride and gratitude. The judge continued, "Mr. Emmanuel, I'm not going to impose a fine today. Instead, I want to use this as a learning experience. Not just for you, but for all of us." The judge turned his attention to the courtroom audience, many of whom were still smiling at the interaction. "We all make mistakes," he said, his voice carrying a note of warmth and understanding. "But it's how we respond to those mistakes that defines us." This young man's honesty is a reminder that we all need to take responsibility, not only for ourselves but for the people we love. Judge Sullivan looked back at Emmanuel. "I'm going to dismiss this ticket, but I want your promise that you'll be more careful in the future, especially with such precious cargo in the car." He nodded toward Grace and the children. Emmanuel's heart swelled with relief. He nodded earnestly. "I promise, Your Honor. I will be more careful. Thank you so much for your understanding." Judge Sullivan smiled and then addressed Ethan one more time. "And Ethan, I want you to keep being honest, okay? It's a brave thing to do, and the world needs more of it." Ethan nodded, his eyes shining. "I will, Your Honor." The judge banged his gavel lightly. "Case dismissed. Take care of your beautiful family, Mr. Emmanuel, and drive safely." As the family turned to leave, the tension that had weighed so heavily on Emmanuel's shoulders finally lifted. Grace squeezed his hand, her eyes full of love and pride. "See? I told you it would be okay," she whispered. Emmanuel smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond just relief. "I know. I'm just glad it's over," he replied, looking down at Ethan. "And I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You were so brave today." Ethan grinned, clearly pleased with himself. "I just told the truth, Dad." Grace laughed softly, ruffling Ethan's hair. "Sometimes, that's the bravest thing you can do." As they walked out of the courtroom together, Emmanuel couldn't help but reflect on how this experience had turned into something more than he could have imagined. What had begun as a simple speeding ticket had transformed into a lesson in honesty, compassion, and the importance of family. The day that had started with worry and fear ended with a renewed sense of gratitude. Emmanuel looked at his wife and children, feeling the love that bound them tightly together. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them as a family, with honesty, courage, and love. Judge Sullivan paused, considering Emmanuel and his family standing before him. He saw a father striving to do his best in a new country, a young mother standing loyally by her husband's side, and an innocent boy who simply wanted to tell the truth. This wasn't just another speeding ticket case. This was an opportunity to make a real difference. The judge decided that this would be a teachable moment for everyone involved. Emmanuel, Judge Sullivan began, his voice gentle but firm. I could fine you the full amount for speeding. You did break the law, after all. But I also understand that you're new here, and sometimes we make mistakes when we're still learning the rules. It's part of adapting to a new place. Emmanuel nodded, the gratitude evident in his eyes. Thank you, Your Honor. I truly appreciate your understanding, he said, his voice slightly shaky with emotion. Judge Sullivan smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair. Tell you what, he said, tapping his fingers lightly on the bench. I'm going to dismiss the fine today. But there's a condition. He paused, making sure Emmanuel was listening intently. I need you to promise me that you'll be extra careful, especially when you have your family in the car. Safety is the most important thing. Mr. Emmanuel, do you promise me that? Emmanuel nodded eagerly, his heart swelling with relief. Yes, Your Honor. I promise. I will be much more careful from now on. Judge Sullivan nodded, seemingly satisfied with the response. He then turned his gaze to Ethan, who was standing close to his father's side, his eyes wide with curiosity. And you, young man, the judge said with a smile, I want you to always remind your dad to drive safely, okay? It looks like you're already doing a great job. Ethan's face lit up, and he nodded vigorously. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice filled with determination. The sincerity of the young boy's response brought a soft chuckle from a few people in the courtroom. Judge Sullivan looked back at Emmanuel and Grace. You have a wonderful family, he said warmly. It's clear to me that you all care deeply for one another, and that's what matters most. Mistakes happen, but it's how we handle them and learn from them that truly defines us. The judge leaned forward slightly, his eyes serious but kind. You know, Emmanuel, moving to a new country is never easy. There are so many rules and cultural norms to learn, and it can be overwhelming. But I see that you're trying your best, and I respect that. You're setting a good example for your children by being here today and facing this mistake head-on. Emmanuel swallowed hard, his emotions getting the better of him for a moment. He could feel Grace's hand resting on his back, a silent reminder of her unwavering support. Thank you, Your Honor, Emmanuel managed to say. It means a lot to hear that. Judge Sullivan smiled. Just remember, you have precious cargo in that car of yours. Your family is counting on you to keep them safe. He turned his attention back to Ethan, his voice lightening. And Ethan, you keep being honest and looking out for your dad. Honesty is a powerful thing, and the world could use more of it. Ethan beamed at the judge, his small chest puffing out a little with pride. I will, Your Honor, he promised. The judge nodded once more, then picked up his gavel. Well then, he said, his tone final but warm. Case dismissed. Take care of each other and drive safely. With a soft bang of the gavel, the tension that had filled the courtroom seemed to dissipate. Emmanuel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Grace squeezed his arm gently, her eyes shining with pride and relief. As they turned to leave the courtroom, Emmanuel looked down at Ethan, who was still smiling from ear to ear. You did great today, buddy, Emmanuel said, his voice filled with affection. Ethan looked up at his father, his eyes twinkling. I just told the truth, Dad. That's what you and Mom always say to do. Grace leaned over and kissed the top of Ethan's head. And you were very brave, sweetheart, she said softly. Sometimes telling the truth is the hardest thing to do, but it's always the right choice. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Emmanuel felt a sense of profound gratitude. What had started as a simple speeding ticket had turned into something much more significant, a lesson in honesty, compassion, and the love that held their family together. Judge Sullivan's kindness and understanding had not only given Emmanuel a second chance, but had also reminded him of the values that truly mattered. The day had begun with anxiety and uncertainty, but it ended with a sense of renewed purpose and connection. Emmanuel knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family, with honesty, compassion, and love guiding their way. With a gentle bang of the gavel, Judge Sullivan concluded, case dismissed. You're free to go, but remember, safety first. You have a beautiful family, and it's clear you all love each other very much. Take care of each other." Emmanuel let out a deep breath of relief, feeling the tension leave his body. He couldn't thank the judge enough, his gratitude spilling out in a heartfelt, "Thank you, Your Honor." Grace smiled warmly at the judge, cradling baby Noah closer to her chest. "Thank you so much," she whispered softly. Ethan, standing proudly by his father, waved energetically to the judge. "By Your Honor," he called out, his innocent voice echoing in the courtroom. The family turned to leave, walking hand in hand through the courtroom's heavy wooden doors. Emmanuel felt a rush of warmth, a swell of emotions flooding over him. Today was supposed to be a simple matter of addressing a speeding ticket, but it had transformed into something far more meaningful. As they stepped out into the bright morning light, Emmanuel couldn't help but reflect on what had just transpired. The courtroom wasn't just a place of judgment today. It had become a place of connection, compassion, and growth. Emmanuel realized that his family was his greatest source of strength. Grace had stood by his side with unwavering support, Ethan had reminded him of the power of honesty, and even the judge had shown them kindness. All these elements came together to turn what could have been a day of fear and frustration into a day of renewed gratitude and unity. Emmanuel looked down at Ethan, who was beaming up at him, clearly pleased with his role in the proceedings. "You were amazing today, Ethan," Emmanuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were honest, and you helped me more than you know." Ethan grinned. "I just told the truth, Dad. That's what you always tell me to do." Grace squeezed Emmanuel's hand gently, her eyes filled with pride and love. "And you set such a wonderful example for our boys," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This wasn't just about a ticket. It was about learning and growing together." Emmanuel nodded, feeling the love radiating from his family. "No matter what happens," he said, his voice resolute, "we face it together. And I promise, I'll always do my best to keep you all safe." With that, the family stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the morning replaced by a lightness in their steps. They walked toward their car, Emmanuel carrying a sense of renewal, a determination to be better, not just as a driver but as a husband and father. Today had taught them all a valuable lesson. Mistakes happen, but how you respond and grow from them is what truly matters. As they reached their car, Ethan looked up, his curiosity piqued. "Can we get ice cream now, Dad?" Emmanuel laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that echoed in the parking lot. He looked at Grace, who gave him an approving nod. "I think that's a great idea," he said, opening the car door. "Today calls for a celebration." And as they drove off, this time, well within the speed limit, Emmanuel couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the chance to learn, for the compassion they had received, and for the love of his family that made every challenge worth facing. They were stronger together, and today had been a reminder of that unbreakable bond. And that's the story of Emmanuel, a father who found himself in court for a simple mistake, only to be reminded of the power of honesty, compassion, and the importance of family. Judge Sullivan's kindness and the innocent honesty of young Ethan made this more than just a case of a traffic violation. It became a story of understanding, forgiveness, and second chances. Life is full of these seemingly small moments, those times when a mistake could easily lead to punishment, but instead becomes an opportunity to learn and grow. Emmanuel learned to be more cautious as a driver, but even more importantly, he learned that his true strength lies in his family. It was the honesty of his young son, the unwavering support of his wife, and the fair and kind judgment of the judge that turned what could have been a stressful situation into a heartwarming and transformative memory. It was a day of realizations for Emmanuel. He realized that no matter where they were, no matter how unfamiliar the circumstances, his family would always be his anchor. The experience reminded him that the most important thing he could do was to be present, be honest, and protect those he loved. He understood that even in the face of mistakes, there is always a way to make things right, especially when you have the support of the people who matter most. Judge Sullivan's courtroom became more than just a place of justice that day. It became a place of compassion and connection. The judge, in his wisdom, used the opportunity to teach not only Emmanuel, but everyone in the courtroom about the value of kindness and second chances. His decision to dismiss the fine was not an act of leniency but an act of understanding, recognizing that the lesson had already been learned in the love shared by this family. And young Ethan, standing bravely by his father's side, showed everyone that honesty, even when it feels difficult, is always the right choice. His innocence and courage left a lasting impression on all who were present, including Judge Sullivan himself. It was a reminder that sometimes, the simplest acts of truth and integrity can have the most profound impact. Thank you for joining us today at Life Story 999. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming and inspiring tales. We would love to hear from you, so drop a comment below. Has there ever been a moment in your life where compassion made all the difference? Remember, kindness can change the world, one small action at a time. Until next time, take care, be kind, and always cherish the people who matter most. Thank you for being a part of our story today. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up, and if you're new to Life Story 999, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another inspiring tale. We strive to bring you real stories that teach us all something meaningful, whether it's about love, family, honesty, or redemption. Feel free to share your own stories in the comments. We believe everyone has a story worth telling, and we'd love to hear yours. Remember to always drive safely, be honest, and show compassion. Life is full of little moments that can make a big difference, just like Emmanuel's day in court. Until next time, thank you, and stay inspired.